Hello and welcome to the first edition of the HCA Fireside Chats. My name is Werner. I am the director of the Heidelberg Center for American Studies at Heidelberg University. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to a new format that will become part of our public forum activities. Over the past year, the COVID-19 pandemic has made in-person events at the HCA impossible. However, a few weeks into the first lockdown, we launched the HCA podcast, which has since built a loyal audience and has generated hundreds of thousands of clicks. Last winter semester, the Heidelberg Center for American Studies organized the Roberto Carola Ring Vorlesung, the university's signature lecture series, which was a great opportunity to test hybrid conversation formats. Thus, the HCA Fireside Chats were born, a series of spirited conversations in front of the historic fireplace in the lounge of the Kurt and Heidemarie Engelhorn Palais, which houses the HCA in the center of Heidelberg's Old Town. We envision the Fireside Chats as one-on-one talks between Heidelberg academics and renowned experts from inside and outside academia. The first three events will focus on the external relations of the United States during the new Biden administration. These initial events are true to the HCA's philosophy of emphasizing global aspects of global American studies. In our research and public events, we do not only pay attention to the North Atlantic region that is so familiar to scholars of American studies in Germany and Europe, but also to the many other regions and countries that matter to the US and its allies in a globalized world. Global American studies looks beyond trodden paths. It also entails new institutional ties to other centers for area studies at Heidelberg University, to the Center for Asian and Transcultural Studies, CATS, and the Heidelberg Center for Ibero-American Studies, HACIAS. It is therefore very fitting that the first HCA Fireside Chat will look at the relations of the United States to Latin America during the first months of the Biden administration. I'm honored and very pleased to welcome, albeit virtually, Rebecca Grynspan to the HCA, a Costa Rican economist and former UN Undersecretary General. Since 2014, she has headed the Ibero-American General Secretariat. Today, she's coming to us from Madrid. Joining Ms. Grynspan in front of the fireplace in the HCA lounge is Francesco Moreno-Fernández, Professor for Ibero-American Linguistic, Cultural, and Social Studies at Heidelberg University and Director of the Heidelberg Center for Ibero-American Studies. He has been my esteemed colleague since 2019 when he joined Heidelberg University's faculty as an Alexander von Humboldt professor. Francesco, welcome to the Heidelberg Center for American Studies. It is a great pleasure to launch this new format, the HCA Fireside Chats, with you today.
Welcome to this Fireside conversation organized by the Heidelberg Center for American Studies. My name is Francisco Moreno-Fernández. I am the director of the Heidelberg Center for Ibero-American Studies. So many thanks to the organizers for this opportunity to discuss topics of common interest to American studies and Ibero-American studies at Heidelberg University. So North America and Ibero-America are close, but separate geographic realities, which nevertheless share much history, much culture, many economic and political interests, and both constitute a geographic base that has experienced significant demographic movements throughout history, from east to west, from south to north. So considering the many shared elements and the intense contacts between North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, including the Iberian Peninsula, of course, in the next few minutes, I would like to bring to the table a number of issues which are of the utmost interest for international relations in the Western Hemisphere. So we ask questions such as the following: how has the Trump administration affected Ibero-American nations? How the corona crisis has affected the political, economic, or social life in Latin America, or what are the most pressing issues for the Ibero-American future in relation to politics or economy? And to discuss these issues such as this, we have the immense fortune and the great honor of having the most relevant and representative personality of the Ibero-American world as a whole. I'm referring to Rebecca Grynspan, Secretary General of the Ibero-American General Secretariat since 2014. And let me say a few words of introduction. Rebecca Grynspan is originally from Costa Rica. She's an economist, a former United Nations Under Secretary General, and Associate Administrator of the United Nations Development Program. Before that, she was Vice President of Costa Rica since 1994 to 1998. Therefore, she's, without a doubt, one of the most relevant figures in Ibero-American politics in our Ibero-American panorama. So warm greetings from Heidelberg University, Ms. Grynspan. It is a pity that the warmth of this fireplace cannot be transmitted through virtual platforms, but I hope at least you can feel the warmth of our gratitude for taking a few minutes for this conversation. Thank you very much for your kindness. Thank you for your valuable time, and we appreciate it very much. So if I may, let's start with some obvious questions. First of all, what are the objectives of the goals of the Ibero-American General Secretariat, and how is internally organized such a significant organization?
Thank you so much, Francisco. It's really a pleasure to be here, and also to be in a moment in which the Ibero-American space and the American space meet together, converge. So thank you very much for this invitation. And Heidelberg is a very well recognized and institution. I've been there. I know how beautiful it is and how the academic life takes over on Heidelberg. So thank you very much for inviting me. Well, I think that it's interesting, important to understand also a little bit of the history. So to understand what the Secretariat, the General Secretariat of Ibero-America does, in fact, we started with summits of the heads of state and government of the 22 countries that are part of Ibero-America. It's all the countries that speak Spanish and Portuguese in the two sides of the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. So you have all the countries in the continent, from Mexico to Tierra del Fuego, and you have two Caribbean countries that are Cuba and Dominican Republic, mm-hmm. and three Ibero countries that are Spain, Portugal, and Andorra. Mm-hmm. So in 1991, we held the first summit of heads of state and government. We will accomplish 3 decades today, this year. But it was only in 2005 that the Secretariat was formed. Uh-huh. So in a way, we migrated from being a mechanism of summits to be a conference. Okay. We're more populated not only by the heads of state and government, but also by the ministers of different sectors, by civil society, by the private sector, by the local authorities. So it was populated as a conference, as an ecosystem, and not just as a summit of the heads of state.
Yeah, okay, so.
So today, I would say there are 3 main areas where we have a very important action, that is culture, that is vertebrates the Ibero-American space, education, science and technology, and social cohesion. all what has to do with poverty and equality and the vulnerable groups of the region.
So how is your day-to-day work like? Your work is more technical work, or is it more diplomatic work? How is your day-to-day?
Difficult to say. I would describe it like a technopole type of work. You know, you have to be technical in the way that you need to put forward important actions for the countries of the Ibero-American space, but also the diplomatic and political part is of the essence. Yes, this is a space for political dialogue. So I have to do a lot in terms of bridging some of the differences. This is a very diverse, really is a type of organization. Countries are very different, very diverse, but it's also a platform for cooperation. So we need to walk on two legs, the political leg and the solidarity cooperation leg.
Yeah, I see. So, and what is the role of the Ibero-American Secretariat in relation to the United States, to the North America in general?
Well, this is a US free space, but there is no doubt in what sense. No, it's important to say this because the US is not an observer to the conference. We have European countries that are observers. Germany, for example, just became an observer to the conference, but the US is not a member and is not an observer to the conference. But you have 50 million people that speak Spanish in the US, yes? Correct. And also a big Portuguese community from Portugal and Brazil, Portuguese speaking. So we have established cultural ties with the US, not political because it won't be appropriate, but yes, in terms of culture and traditions, we have relations with organizations in the US.
Yeah, because migration is a big issue internally for Ibero-America, but also in relation to the United States. So, absolutely. Yeah, how you handle immigration issues in the summits, for example, or in your secretary?
Well, we had a very important voice before Istanbul. That was the conference on migration organized by the UN. And actually, we had a consensus declaration on migration before Istanbul that was very important to build up the consensus for the conference. And we have a meeting that tries to bring all the organizations that are working on migration issues in Latin America and in the Ibero-American conference. It's a difficult issue because migration is very different from the North Triangle, let's say, of Central America. That is right now is the most people trying to migrate to the US, but we have internal migration that have gone up significantly in these years. Yes, and so we have the Venezuelan migration to the neighboring countries. We have the migration from Haiti, for example, to Latin America also, that was intensified some years ago. So internal migration, we have the migration from Nicaragua to Costa Rica. So internal migration within the region has been very, very important and increasingly important in the late years to now.
And have you perceived any change in between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, or there is no time enough yet to know that there's some important changes?
Well, I would say yes and no. There are changes, especially with respect to minors. And also to what is called the dreamers. You know, those children that got to the US illegally, but that it was not their decision, but their parents' decision. Yes. And in Obama's time, those dreamers were given a special status in the US because you cannot blame them to have done anything illegal because they were minors when they migrated to the US.
Yeah, of course.
And that was a very important part of the migration and of the demands, let's say, from the Latin American countries. In Trump time, that was abolished. The special status, and the dreamers feared to be expelled from the US, having lived there all their lives, you know, with no ties probably with their countries of origin.
Yeah.
And now Biden has reestablished that line for a more normal and orderly migration for those kids, for a regularization of their status. Now, what has happened in the last weeks with many children going alone to the US, and it has been in numbers that were not possible to handle well, it has been very sad. I think that they have taken back many of the migrants that have arrived to the US illegally in the same way Trump did in terms of what we call hot devolutions.
Yeah.
Yes. But the minors are given a different treatment, and we are in the wait and see, let's say, type of mood in terms to know how they will handle the minors that has arrived.
Oh yeah, I see. And how have been, or how are the North-South relations in this pandemic situation? In terms of movements, population movements, or in terms of vaccines distribution, how is the relation North-South in this terrible situation?
Well, we talked about the migration between Latin America and the US, but we have also a lot of migration from Latin America to Spain and to Portugal. Yes, that in fact, it has been a different kind of migration in the sense that it has been incorporated to society in very easy terms. Yes, especially because of culture and the language, you know, so that has allowed for a better integration into society. Lately, I would say that the problem of migration, at least with the Iberian Peninsula, is not coming from Latin America, as you know. And with respect to the US, as I said, it has intensified from the northern triangle of Central America. There is a desperate situation there because the pandemic has disproportionately hit the Latin American countries.
Yeah.
Let me give you, Francisco, one number that is very telling. Yes, Latin America is 8% of the global population. And right now, we represent more than 25% of the death globally. So I think that tells it all, yes?
I see.
And in economic terms, probably we are the worst hit region in the world, with a decline in GDP that we have never seen, not even in the 80s. That is called the lost decade of Latin America, yes?
Okay.
So poverty has gone up, you know, we have regressed 20 years, 2 decades, in in the progress that we have made in terms of the poverty indicators. 2 decades in 1 year. Inequality is going up, and also climate change is really hitting the region. So you have the dry corridor, what we call the dry corridor in Central America, that is hitting a lot of the rural population, of the coffee growers that are the medium-sized coffee growers in Honduras. So you have expelling, very strong expelling factors for migration right now in the northern triangle of Central America.
Yeah, so the economic consequences are terrible in general. Two decades lost is too much, and I wonder what are the difference you have observed in the political treatment or political approach of the pandemic by different nations in Latin America or in the Americas in general?
Well, I would say that mostly all countries took very stiff and quick measures when the pandemic hit. But let's be frank, Francisco, it's very different to have a social protection system like in Europe and have an informality rate of 50% in Latin America, yes? So lockdowns in Latin America has a completely different effect than in the developed world, because people, if you don't have social protection, if you are in the informal sector, you know, there is a trade-off between the lockdown and the possibility of income earning for many of these families. So even if the governments took very quick measures, the results were not as good as you can expect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I see.
And also there was this problem, you know, many of the Latin American countries have income transfer programs, but they were devoted only to a small part of the population, yes, to the very poor. But the pandemic hit at everybody. Yeah. So you had middle income families without income, you know, in the pandemic. You have, not all the informal sector is poor. Yes, they were able to earn enough before and not now. So you had to expand very rapidly the support programs for poor families. And it was very difficult for the governments to put the systems in place to help those citizens, and also the micro and small size firms from the private sector that they really were hit very badly because of the pandemic.
Yeah, and the situation is in movement. So there is the possibility of more changes in the next future, in next months. I think the situation in Peru, for example, in other countries is still terrible. So let's see what's happening in a few months. So are you analyzing what to do in the future in order to recover these 2 lost decades, or there's a plan, or we are just waiting for the end of this dramatic situation in order to see how to do?
No, I would say, Francisco, and that was the importance of the summit that we just had. We had just in April, at the end of April, the summit of heads of state and government. And there were very important consensus around several issues. First, vaccination. Vaccination, you asked me before about vaccination. The truth is that the developing world is not receiving any important proportion of the vaccines that the world has been able to produce. I would say that we saw the success of science and the failure of governance in the world. The multilateral institutions were not able really to put together a program that will make a coherent action from all the countries. And so it was not that we had national responses, we had nationalistic responses. Yes. that made less effective the collective action. Yeah. Yes.
So, but we see that the United States, we see that the United States have apparently vaccines enough in order to distribute to the whole population. Is there the possibility of any kind of agreement with Mexico, for example, or some other Latin American countries in order to redistribute all the excess of vaccines in the United States?
Well, a very important question, because in the summit, Spain announced that once they will have vaccinated 50% of the population, they will start sending the excess vaccines that they have from their contracts. You know that the developed world contracted 3 times what they need. Yeah, right. So Spain will start to send through COVAX, that is the multilateral fund for vaccines, yes, for developing countries, and the health organization, the Pan-American Health Organization, they will start to send their excess vaccines to Latin America. The US has sent vaccines, they say, to Canada and Mexico, but now Blinken has announced that they will send 60 million excedent of vaccines to the world. Mm-hmm. What we don't know yet is what the mechanism that the US will exercise to do that. Yeah. But what we are is calling for several things. But the first is calling for all the countries to follow Spain's example. Because if they will wait until having 100% of the population vaccinated, we will wait in the last place of the world. You know, we will be the last. And the Inter-American Development Bank has established that every trimester that we postpone vaccination, we lose more than 2 points in GDP of recovery. Yeah. That is how difficult this is if we don't get the vaccination first.
Yeah, it's urgent, the problem I see. So you mentioned before the climate change issue. There's an important point in this world today, even in relation to the pandemic. So the 27th Ibero-American Summit held in Andorra 1 month ago, as you mentioned, presented in its conclusion a communique on sustainable energy, in which it talks about the need to promote international cooperation to increase the rate of energy efficiency and to have a clean energy system with zero net emissions, climate resilient, safe, modern, and sustainable, whose potential is to fight against climate change. So I wonder how Ibero-American countries are going to tackle this huge task.
Yeah. No. Thank you for bringing it. Thank you for reading, because it was very strong. It's a very strong statement. Yeah. So the first thing, Francisco, you will understand is that after 11 years that the ministers of environment didn't meet in the Ibero-American space, we were able to have a meeting of the environment ministers and have a consensus declaration. That is not something easy, believe me.
Not easy.
So, and with everybody, we had the 22 countries. We had Portugal and Spain, and we had Brazil and Mexico. We had everybody. Mm-hmm. We had Costa Rica, and we had Argentina. You understand this, and the positions, the initial positions of each of these actors was very different. And we had this consensus declaration that was elevated to the heads of state afterwards. So we have a very strong mandate. And it's very important, especially this year, because this year you will have two very important global conferences. You will have the conference on biodiversity, and you will have the conference on climate change in Glasgow. And the biodiversity, I think that in China. Okay. So these are so to have one voice of 22 countries will be very important to push forward for a more ambitious declaration and action from the global summits.
And the Ibero-American Secretariat is promoting some kind of programs about bioenergy or biodiversity. It's just in a diplomatic support. It's also an economic support. How is dealing with this kind of a line of work?
We are working very hard with the private sector in terms of the ESG indicators. Yes, environment, social, and governance. And we have a whole program of what we call, a new model for the private sector. And in the private sector fora, that was at the same time as the heads of government summit, there was a very strong statement from the firms that were represented in terms of following a more sustainable path, where clean energy is one of them. Yes, renewable energy is one of them. Latin America is very strong in renewable energy. And Ibero-America, because Spain and Portugal are very strong allies in this agenda. So in clean energy and renewable energy, very strong, and we are doing a lot through the offices for climate change in all the countries. We have a very strong network in terms of the climate change offices, the water and sanitation programs that are very important for sustainability, and a very high-level dialogue on sustainability with governments, with local actors, the local governments. We have the network of capitals, of all the capitals of the countries of Ibero-America. That is a very strong organization too. And you know that if we don't act at the urban setting and citizens, nothing will happen. So we have specific networks, an observatory, a political dialogue, but also very concrete programs in this direction.
Okay, so beyond the climate change, which is a global problem and issue, what do you think are the most pressing issues for Ibero-American future? Is in the side of the economy because of the pandemic? Is in the side of the politics because of the populisms, for example? What is the more pressing issues that worry you as a Secretary General of the Ibero-American Secretariat?
Can I say all of the above?
Of course.
No, let me say it. I would say that the recovery is a very pressing issue. But I would say, frankly, Francisco, that if we will recover economic growth with more inequality and poverty, that recovery doesn't deserve the name because it won't be sustainable for the democratic systems of Latin America. A recovery that will hit even harder the poor and will open up even more the inequalities that were already an open wound for the region. So I think that if we don't understand that the reason why we have been so hardly hit by the pandemic is precisely because of our structural deficits of before, we will take the wrong decisions. So I think that we have an opportunity also within the crisis to recover with a more equitable and sustainable path. And the reasons why I think we can do it is because there are strengths that the region has, and that if we take the opportunity to do the right thing, we can recover in a stronger manner, in a more sustainable development path. Now, politics is a problem. As you know, we have entered what we call the electoral super cycle.
Yeah.
We will have elections at all levels, national and local and parliament elections in the next 2 years in almost every country of the region. So my hope is that we can get wide consensus. Mm-hmm. But the risk of more polarization is real. Mm-hmm. It's real. And we don't know. I think that we will see everything in the region, you know.
And when
we cannot say that there will be a tendency. I think that the countries, some will go the polarized way, some will try to have wide consensus to recover strongly, to bring civil society and private sector into a dialogue that will allow for, you know, a new social contract in the region.
Okay, so when you say by polarization, are you talking about rich and power, or are you talking about the small countries and big countries, or private and public, or any kind of polarization?
No, I was referring more to the political polarization that the elections can bring, with very confrontative views in terms of what the countries need. Okay. And that is a problem, but because as I said before, I think that Latin America really needs a new social contract.
Okay. So finger crossed for less polarization. And how you foresee the future for the United States-Latin America relations? What is your future, for your perspective from the Secretary, from the Ibero-American Secretariat?
Well, I am more hopeful that, for example, the climate change agenda that the Biden administration has brought to the forefront of the priorities will benefit the world, but definitely will benefit Latin America. Mm-hmm. And I think that the ecological transition, if you want to call it that way, is a huge opportunity for the region. Probably we are in the region that will have the most rentability of every dollar invested in renewables and climate change. Really, I think that Latin America has a population that is very aware of climate change. There is an energy, there is this young population that is very committed. And I think that the new source of growth and more equitable growth can come from the ecological transition. And the US will be a very important partner now with the Biden administration. The second thing is that we are seeing already a very the benefit of the recovery package that Biden has put forward. We are seeing a climbing in the remittances to the region. Mm-hmm. And I think that many of the countries, especially on the northern part of Latin America, will benefit from the growth that the US is showing and the support from the recovery packages that the Biden administration is putting forward. And the third point is that it has promised a 4 billion investment in Central America to counteract the structural factors that are behind the high rates of migration.
Okay, thank you so much for your thoughts and for your proposals. Unfortunately, our fireside conversation at Heidelberg Center for American Studies has to finish. I am very grateful to Professor Bel Werner, director of this center, for his invitation and for his interest in Ibero-America. Of course, I sincerely appreciate your participation, the participation of Rebecca Grynspan, Secretary General of the Ibero-American General Secretariat. And I also thank you, all those who have followed this conversation, for their attention and concern. We look forward to seeing you at future meetings at the Heidelberg Center for American Studies and also at the Heidelberg Center for Ibero-American Studies. So I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for this conversation, and I hope to see you very soon in Heidelberg.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Let me say two things. One is that we need the world and we need multilateralism to get out of this crisis. And second, quiero mandar un saludo muy especial al Centro de Estudios Iberoamericanos en Heidelberg. Espero poder estar con todos ustedes muy pronto. Y como decimos en mi país, pura vida.
Pura vida. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much.